Our Bible word is Mark 10 verse 45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So this verse in the Gospel of Mark, you can say this is the key verse for the entire Gospel. This explains Jesus. This explains the Gospel. This explains the life of Jesus. So you can say this is the heartbeat of the Gospel as a whole. If we look at the Gospel, for the first half or so, it's not really known who Jesus is, but he's in fact the suffering Messiah. But it's not known in the early stages. Well, at least by people. Because the people do not understand who Jesus is. Even his own disciples don't understand him. But there's something called this messianic secret. The identity of Jesus is a secret. Because there's these questions that are asked, who can this be? Even his disciples ask it. I mean, after this, he calmed the storm on the sea. They ask, who can this be? Jesus is a mystery. Of course, God knows who he is. The demons know who he is. He's the Son of God. He's the Messiah. But people do not know it. Even his disciples haven't come to that realization yet. But from Mark 27 onwards, there's now a strong break in the narrative, or a new development. Because there it's revealed that Jesus is the servant Messiah. He's the suffering Messiah, like that person described in Isaiah 53. Because Jesus asked them there, who do the people say I am? They say you maybe one of the prophets or whoever. But then Peter answered and said to him, you are the Christ, in other words, the Messiah or anointed one. And then Jesus reveals to them, this is what the Messiah will do. He will suffer. It's a suffering Messiah that they're dealing with. And then he also says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer and be killed. So from here on, there's this shift in the narrative, because it's now revealed that Jesus is the servant Messiah. He's a suffering Messiah who comes to die as a ransom for people's sins. But this is also part of a larger story, because in consecutive chapters, similar things happen. And there's this cycle of discipleship and servant leadership. And there's this 3 cycle of events. And 3 times Jesus predicts his death. 3 times Jesus says, I'm going to suffer, they're going to put me to death, etc. And then on 3 occasions, the disciples respond with pride and misunderstanding. This is a big theme in the Gospel of Mark. The disciples don't understand Jesus and what he's about. If this Gospel is based on Peter's recollections, and they were collected later, and the Gospel was maybe written in Rome, Peter was brutally honest, and he says, well, we disciples, we were a bit dumb. We didn't get Jesus. We didn't understand him repeatedly. And that's a theme that comes across regularly in the Gospel of Mark. And then, after that misunderstanding, on 3 occasions, Jesus must teach them about what we can call servant leadership and true discipleship. In other words, this is what it means to be my follower and also to be a leader in the Christian church. So if we look at that in more detail, if we go to the first prediction, that's in Mark 8 verses 31 to 32. Jesus says that's where that dramatic shift in the narrative in Mark takes place, because from there on the suffering Messiah is revealed. And Jesus says, I'm going to die and suffer. And then Peter responds to Jesus and says, that will never happen, Lord. And of course, Jesus famously tells him, get behind me, Satan. Of course, Peter doesn't understand Jesus. And then Jesus explains to them, or to Peter, what does it mean to be his follower? If we go to chapter 8, verses 34. Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And a bit later, Jesus again makes a second prediction of his suffering and death. And for a second time now, the disciples as a whole, just after that, they have a discussion amongst themselves, who's the greatest. Imagine that. Jesus just said he's going to suffer and die, and then they have an argument, who's going to be the greatest, or who is the greatest among them. Completely misunderstanding Jesus. Now Jesus responds to them now also, again for a second time. This is what it means to be my follower. If we go to chapter 9, verse 35. If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. You disciples who want to argue who's the greatest, you don't understand me. But who wants to be last or first must be last. Things work differently with me, not the normal way things work in the world. And then Jesus makes a third prediction, the same prediction. He's going to die, he's going to suffer, he's going to Jerusalem. And then, believe it or not, again, the disciples, they just are totally insensitive to Jesus and his teaching and his mission. Because now the brother James and John, they come to Jesus and they ask him for the chief seats in the kingdom. They want to sit on his left and sit on his right. Imagine that. Again, complete incomprehension by the disciples. And then Jesus now explains to them again, if we go from verse 10, verses 43. Jesus speaks there of the Gentiles who rules and lords over people. But he says, yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. And now we come to the crux, the heartbeat, the heart of the gospel. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. So take note of these three cycles. 3 times Jesus predicts his death. 3 times the disciples respond with pride and misunderstanding. And then Jesus must teach them. This is what it means to be my follower. This is what it means to be great and honorable. And now if we look at our immediate context, of course it's about James and John. Jesus again predicted his death and resurrection. They want the chief seats. Can we sit at your right and your left, Lord? And then they will receive positions of power. We can call this pericope entitlement versus service. I mean, there's a lot of that around in the world. Down through the ages, people want power. They want prestige. They want the honor. They want to look down on others, and they want other people to look up to them. And this is what James and John also, in a sense, wanted. They want to sit right next to Jesus, because if he's the Messiah, it means he's the king of Israel. It means he's like David. So they will have those special positions to sit right next to the king in the kingdom. And then the other disciples heard about this, and they became angry. And it tells us they exactly like James and John. They also want these key positions, and honor and privilege and entitlement. They like James and John. They know better. And then, of course, we have this response of Jesus. No, that's how the Gentiles do it. That's how the world does things. With us, it works differently. There's no power. There's no privilege. There's no entitlement. You have no right to look down on others where you're in a higher position, so to speak. Who's the greatest in God's kingdom is those who are the lowest, the least, those who are willing to serve. This is a model of servant leadership that Jesus has given as an example himself. Like he says, the Son of Man did not come to serve or to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. That word ransom means manumission fee. It's a metaphor. Jesus pays the price, so to speak, to redeem us. In other words, to free us, to liberate us from slavery, to sin, to death. Jesus has come and paid the fee and released us so that we can be free. So, Jesus is the ultimate example of servant leadership. We mustn't be there for status, for privilege, for power. And in this, Jesus was for us the ultimate example. He was the suffering servant. He came to suffer. He was a servant. He served mankind. He wasn't so much in a position of power and privilege like kings would be or other leaders. So Jesus is the suffering servant who has come to set us free. He has ransomed us from sin and from death. The ultimate example for us to follow.